So 2 years ago, our family vacation was a cruise. It was our first cruise as a family that we went on. And we realized that the two younger kids who are under 16 only had to have a birth certificate to leave the country on a boat. We made the same assumption last year when we were invited by my in-laws to meet them in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. They have a timeshare there, and they invited all of us to come down and to spend a week with them in Cabo San Lucas. We were going to fly down and meet them there, hang out for the week. We had some events planned, some excursions planned, and we're anticipating for many months our family vacation to Cabo San Lucas. I am a person that normally researches things to death when we go somewhere. I want to make sure that we do excursions that are fun, that we find things that may be a little out of the box that not everyone else is doing. And so I'm a pretty extensive researcher when it comes to vacations and family trips and things like that. But I made a horrible mistake 1 year ago. We loaded up early on a Saturday morning about 5 a.m., anticipating a decent day of travel. It's actually not too much travel to get down there. It's about a 3-hour flight from Atlanta. So to the airport very early, anticipating being in Cabo San Lucas by mid-afternoon. I knew something was wrong. We checked in at the Huntsville airport, and I have flown a lot in and out of Huntsville, and so I'm familiar with the personnel there. And when they looked at us that morning and they said, all right, we need all 5 passports. And I realized I had 3 passports and 2 birth certificates. And I said, well, here's the 3 passports for everyone 16 and over, and here's the 2 birth certificates for the 2 that are under 16. And they said, we have to have 5 passports for you to fly out of the country. And let's just say that the rest of that day, things got progressively worse and not progressively better. Somehow in my mind, I thought I can talk them into this. But I guess there's government regulations that prevent that kind of thing from happening. I at least talked them into getting us to Atlanta where I felt like I could handle things. I just thought, man, we're in Huntsville, Alabama. They don't know anything. Just get me to Atlanta. At least in Atlanta, we can figure things. I mean, that's Delta's home. I'll talk to Mr. Delta himself and get us to Mexico or something. And so we got to Atlanta, which they technically were not even supposed to do on that first leg, but we got there and the news got worse, and they said, I hate to tell you this, but you're not going to Mexico anytime in the near future. And so we started a mad scramble to figure out how can we somehow get to Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. And the good news about getting to Atlanta is they said, well, look, here's your one shot. There is a passport office that's a one-day office in Atlanta. It's the only one within 800 miles. If there wasn't one in Atlanta, you would have to go to Miami. But there is one in Atlanta, but you need to be at that passport office at 8 a.m. Monday morning. And there's no guarantees. They take the certain number of people that don't have appointments. Like you can try to get an appointment, so we call, and the appointment was like 3 months out. They said they will take a certain number of people on that Monday outside of the regular appointment. So we were there like 4 a.m., standing in line outside the building. And then they wouldn't let you stand in the building. You had to stand like outside the building on the curb waiting for this office to open. And needless to say, it turned into a long ordeal. We had to drive back from Atlanta on Saturday back to Decatur to get a notarized decree from their mom that they could go. We had to drive back to Atlanta on Sunday afternoon to make sure we were there bright and early Monday morning, and we stood in line and stood in line and stood in line. And I realized that there were also about 150 people standing with us that were in the exact same dire situation that we were in, trying to get somewhere in the world and had something wrong with their passport. And everything was ready for us. We had planned everything. We were packed. We had excursions booked. We planned to have a good time. All of our plans were in place. Everything was ready, but I had forgotten the most important thing to get us to Cabo San Lucas, which is all 5 of us needed passports. Well, the good news is by the end of the day, Zach and Reagan had their passports. There they are. There's the evidence after a long day. And then after they got their passports, we were able the next morning, Tuesday morning by this time, to get on a plane. So there's the 3 of them on a plane, headed to Cabo San Lucas 3 days later, and we eventually made it to our beautiful vacation destination in Cabo San Lucas and ended up having a great time. The airline was great to let us change all of our flights multiple times. The resort was great to let us change our days. We rebooked all of our excursions without any money out of pocket having to do that. So everything ended up great. But have you ever been in one of those moments where you forgot the most important thing? Like everything was lined up, but you forgot what was most important. We've all heard these stories about parents that are scrambling and going here and there, and amidst the busyness, they forget a child. My parents, I grew up in a pastor's home. We all got home from church one night. My dad looked at my mom. Obviously, in that type of situation, you're all driving separate cars to church and those things. And my dad gets home and looks at my mom and says, "Where's Derek?" who is my younger brother that was about 3 years old at the time. And she said, "Well, he was riding with you." And he said, "No, he was riding with you." They said, "Well, where's the last place you saw him?" They're like, "Asleep on the church pew." And so we went back to the church, and guess what? He's still asleep on the church pew where they left him. They forgot the most important thing. They forgot what was most important. It happens all the time. Stephen Covey, who's an author, writes a lot of books, co-authored a book called First Things First. And he asked this question in his book. He says, what is the one activity that you know that if you did that activity superbly well and consistently, that it would have a significant positive result in your life? What is the one activity that if you know that you did that one thing superbly well and consistently, that it would have a positive result in your life? And then his follow-up question is this: why are you not doing it? Why are you not doing that one thing? We all know why, don't we? We know why, because urgency trumps important in our lives. Urgency always trumps what is most important in our lives. Life, especially life in our culture, is controlled by the urgent. The task that is right in front of me is what most often gets my attention. Even something as simple as email in our culture, you can highlight it with a red little exclamation point that says what? This message is urgent. It's important. I need a response on it. Urgency often trumps important. And the problem with that is that urgent gets prioritized and important gets de-emphasized. And urgent can actually become a distraction to what is most important. Any of you ever watched that show, Wipeout? So if you've ever watched Wipeout, you know that the goal of Wipeout is to get from the start to the finish safely. We'll just put it that way, right? And the problem with the Wipeout obstacle course is not the goal, it's everything that happens between the starting point and the finish line. And most often contestants, they're not focused on the finish line, are they? They're focused on the giant boxing glove that's about to protrude out of the wall and knock them on their rear end, right? They're focused on the thing that's spinning under their feet. They're focused on all these obstacles that are right in front of them, the things that are most urgent in that moment. And it's often the urgent that hinders us from focusing on the important. And I love the fact that Jesus addresses this very subject in our text today. Grab your Bible and turn to Luke chapter 10. Now, I know if you've been with us the last few weeks, we made it to Luke 15 last week, and now you're thinking, Devin, what's going on here? We're supposed to be finishing this series in the near future, but we're moving backward. Well, here's what I did. I let Dave and Tim last week speak on two of the easiest texts in Luke's gospel. Let's just be honest, right? Good Samaritan and prodigal son. Like, how can you go wrong with those two stories? And so, but I wanted to back up just a little bit and touch on this story today because it is important in the life of our series. Let me put this in context for you when we get to Luke chapter 10. And again, we are a Bible preaching, teaching church here. So bring your Bibles to church when you can. There's just something to me about holding a hard copy of God's Word in your hands. I know you can pull out your phones and all that, and that's perfectly acceptable. But there's something unique to me about holding a Bible in your hand. So try to be consistent to bring your Bibles, and we preach the Bible here. And I always tell you, if something I say contradicts this, you go with this, okay? But I want you to see it to make sure that what we're preaching is the Bible. So let me put this story in context. Jesus has been teaching and saying a lot of things by this point in his ministry, and what we've learned is that Jesus practiced what he preached. He not only said things, but he went out into the culture and did them. And we learned that Jesus has been proclaiming the gospel to a lot of different types of people. As a matter of fact, one of our earlier messages, we saw where Jesus spoke from Isaiah, and he said, I have come to proclaim good news to all sorts of people, to the poor, to the religious, to the sick, to the ostracized, to the hated, to my family, to my friends. Jesus came to proclaim the good news, the gospel, to all types of people. And then he's been calling followers to continue what he began. And as Jesus does this, he creates a number of different reactions to him in that culture and our culture today. He created a reaction that some people would follow him, that they would commit and devote their lives to him. He created a reaction that some people would scratch their heads and say, who is this guy? He's a great prophet, or something's going on. There's something unique about him. He created reactions of a lot of people who had sick loved ones that said, this guy's a healer. Let's take our sick loved ones to him. And then we'll learn as we move toward the end of Luke's gospel that he also created a response of hatred, of people that despised him and ultimately wanted to kill him. And so all of these reactions are going on to Jesus. And by this time in Jesus' story, he's very focused on one thing. He's making a beeline to the cross. All of his attention is focused on the end of his life when he will die for the sins of humanity and be raised back to life by God the Father. So there's a lot of hype going on in Jesus' life at this time, a lot of busyness going on. And so a lot of healing, a lot of teaching, a lot of ministry, a lot of interacting, a lot of discipling this small band of followers that are with him, a lot of preaching and proclaiming to large groups of people, and then a lot of individual attention with people that need healing, a lot of attention given to people who have heavy needs and burdens. So lots of hype, lots of busyness going around Jesus at this time. And what's important that we have seen over and over and over and over again in this text is that in the midst of all this chaos, that Jesus frequently finds himself spending very focused time with the Father. That amidst all the ministry and the teaching and the busyness, that time and time again, Jesus pulls back and he goes into isolation and he spends time with his Father. And if we are to continue what he began as a church and as followers, we've got to include this element in this series. And this element that we'll see today of sitting at the feet of Jesus, of learning from Jesus. You see, continuing what Jesus started is not just about ministry. It's not just about the actions of Jesus. It's also about sitting at the feet of Jesus and learning from Jesus. And so what we have in Luke chapter 10 is we have the story of the Good Samaritan that Dave taught on, and Jesus is basically answering the question, what does it mean to love our neighbor? And he tells us what it means to love our neighbor in the story of the Good Samaritan. And now the story of Mary and Martha in this same chapter, following the story of the Good Samaritan, we learn what does it mean to fall in love with God? What does it mean to love God? So let's jump into our text. Luke chapter 10 and verse 38. Now, as they went on their way, now let me qualify who they is here. They is Jesus and all of his followers. Now, we can interpret that in a couple of different ways. We know that at a minimum it was Jesus and his 12 disciples. If we back up into the previous chapters, we learn that Jesus had actually sent out over 70 people who have now returned to Jesus. So there's a high possibility that we're not just talking about Jesus and the 12 here, that we're talking about up to 100 people possibly. And so as they're passing through this village, they went on their way. Jesus entered a village, and a woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. This is kind of the opposite of the Good Samaritan story when Jesus was being challenged by a lawyer that says, what's the greatest commands? And Jesus says, love God, love your neighbor, and here's who your neighbor is. In this instance, Mary is very affirming. She's very welcoming of who Jesus is. And from the indication of the text, Mary is the head of this household. And so she welcomes Jesus into her home. She's the hostess. And from reading this text and others, more than likely, she's the oldest child in this situation, the oldest sibling. If you know the life of Jesus, you know that there were three siblings, Lazarus, Martha, and Mary. that were dear friends of Jesus. As a matter of fact, Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, and other times we see him interacting consistently with Mary and Martha. So these would be friends of Jesus, and they have invited Jesus into their home, Martha in particular, as he's passing by. And again, he probably has this large group of people, possibly up to 100 that are with him. Now let me ask you, if 100 people are dropping by your house to stay for a while and to hang out, how are you going to feel? You're probably going to feel a lot like Martha. Martha was overwhelmed with 100 people dropping by. And I would say that a lot of her feelings are based on who she is in the family. You guys ever seen this book, like the birth order book, that kind of defines if you're an oldest child, this is kind of what you look like. If you're a middle child, here's your personalities. If you're a baby, the youngest child, here's your personality. If you believe in any of that, and it seems to ring true in a lot of instances, the oldest child often is very driven, very goal-focused, very task-oriented. The middle child, whoop, whoop, for all the middle children out there like me, the middle child is often a little more laid back, takes things a little more calmly. It's not in such an urgency all the time. My kids reflect this. Kaylee, my oldest, is the one that seems to be the most driven and goal-oriented and task-driven. Reagan, who is our second child, and who I have a connection with because I'm a middle child. I call her Tutu because we're both twos. And she was born on December 22nd, so she's my Tutu. And so we have that connection. We have a similar personality and being kind of laid back on a lot of things. And then there's the third child, the baby, who basically sits in their room and plays video games and gets whatever they want. Right? And so if you believe in any of this, we kind of understand Martha's dilemma here. Martha has this large group of people that are coming to her house, and she feels the pressure. She feels the weight, and she is scrambling to get things done. Now, we live in a Martha world, don't we? We live in a world of busyness and craziness and getting things done. I just read this week that now the United States of America is the most worked country in the world, meaning that we put in more hours of work than any other nation, any other free nation on the planet, that we are a worked people, that there's constantly something to be done. Our lives are often controlled by what is urgent, what is right in front of us. There's the busyness of everything around us. So we get Martha's perspective. We get, like, there's this large group of people coming. Remember the luau we had a few weeks ago? Again, with my personality, I'm a little more laid back. I'm a little like, it'll be okay, Ash, and whatever happens, happens. And Ash is the oldest child. And so she was like, here's your list to make sure of things that are done for the luau. Thank you. Wish I'd have had this 4 weeks ago. But we had a large group of people coming to our house. So there's a lot of stuff evidently to be done in that case. And I have to admit, I took an extra 2 hours to get the yard mowed just because I knew, just me, a mower, and an iPod. Man, that's... And so... very task-oriented. So we get Martha's perspective here. We live in a Martha world. And she's busy, and she's frantic, and she's urgent. Check out verse 39. And she had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to his teaching. While Martha is scrambling, Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus listening. As a matter of fact, in the New Testament, most often when you see Mary, she's sitting at the feet of Jesus. In John's Gospel, chapter 11, chapter 12, Mary's sitting at the feet of Jesus. In Luke chapter 7, she's learning from Jesus. Now, let me just say this. We don't have time to chase this rabbit, but for her to be sitting at the feet of a rabbi, of a teacher in that culture, was very presumptuous, one. Most of the time in that culture, this would have been reserved for men only. And here's Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus, learning from the Master. And this is what I love about Jesus. Jesus doesn't turn her away. He's not a misogynist in any way. He's not like, this is for men only. Get out of here, woman. You have no place at my feet. What does Jesus do? He welcomes her in to sit and learn. He goes against every cultural norm around him to embrace the women of that society. And here she is learning at the feet of Jesus. So we have one sister busy, one sister sitting You can do the math in your head. Like, I don't even have to read the rest of this story, right? Like, you know what's about to happen. The water is starting to boil. You can see what's about to happen. The text thumbs are about to start flying, right? And so you can see what's happening. Verse 40. But Martha was, look at this word. What's the next word? Was distracted with much serving. Interesting phrase. Martha was distracted with much serving. So what does she do? She went up to Jesus and said, Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Tell her then to help me. I love that she starts calling Jesus out because she's frustrated with Mary. Martha is distracted with much serving. Distracted by serving. Like, that doesn't always register with us. Like, how do you get distracted by serving someone else? She's distracted by serving. Distractions turn our attention away from what is most important. Doesn't matter if it's serving or whatever good thing. Distractions turn our attention away from what is most important. You see, most of us find ourselves in a Martha world. We're busy. We're facing what's urgent. Most of you know, like, I work another full-time job besides leading you guys. And so it's easy for me to find myself distracted with the craziness and the busyness and the appointments and the phone calls and the traveling and everything that's associated with my life. It's easy for me to find myself distracted with good things that are not the most important things. And here's Martha in a Martha world, and yet her sister is having a Mary moment, sitting at the feet of Jesus. And in a Martha world, we have to force ourselves to have Mary moments, don't we? Like, that doesn't come natural to us, to have Mary moments, to be sitting and learning amidst the craziness and the chaos. Even if it's technology. Like, we can't sit still and listen. Like, one of the things that we enjoy about going, like, on a cruise, for instance, is technology free. Like, if you're like me, when I'm sitting still, I'm still got usually some piece of technology in my hand. If it's a iPhone or iPad or reading or something in my hand, it's very hard for me just to sit and listen, or I'm watching something. And so we live in a Martha world, and we have to force ourselves to have Mary moments. And distractions, as we see in this text, distractions often turn into frustration. And so Martha calls out Jesus. Jesus, tell her to help me. Tell her to help me. There's a tantrum going on here, right? Martha's pitching a fit. Now she says to Jesus, do you not see what's going on here, Lord? Do you not see what's going on? Look at everything I'm doing. And look what she is not doing. She's focused on what Mary is not doing, even more than what she is doing. I like to call this kitchen identity. Kitchen identity. My wife, Ashley, loves to cook. She loves her kitchen. She loves to make great meals. I love to eat great meals. So, man, what a great combination that is. Ash loves to cook. Just yesterday, she made homemade strawberry jam from fresh strawberries. She made fresh tomato sauce from tomatoes out of her little struggling garden this year. And then we made together a team effort. I'm more like the sous chef in this situation, or sous chef at times. But the sous chef here helped her make homemade ravioli with homemade pasta. All this in the kitchen yesterday. So a large part of her day was spent in the kitchen. She loves to do that. That's part of who she is as a person. But guess what? If Ashley did not love to be in the kitchen at all, my love for her would not be any less. Why? Because the kitchen doesn't define who she is. It's a thing she enjoys and a hobby that she loves, but it doesn't define her. She is who she is, whether she ever steps foot in a kitchen or not. Her identity is not found just in the kitchen. So what is kitchen identity? Kitchen identity is being identified primarily by something that you do. and not who you are. Kitchen identity is being identified by your actions over your character, by what you do and not who you are. Kitchen identity often comes out like, look at what I'm doing and look at what they are not doing. Jesus, look at me. Look at all that I do. Look how good I am. Look how better I am than that person. How much better I am than them. Look at me. Look at all the tasks I perform, the ways I serve. Kitchen identity is finding your identity in your actions, even good actions, and not in who you are in Jesus. It is our kind of default button to measure our significance in terms of what we are doing and not who we are. It is our natural tendency to define our significance and to measure our significance in terms of what we are doing. And when others are not doing what we think they should be doing, man, we get frustrated, don't we? We get frustrated and it boils over and we start clanging the pots and pans. Right? Let somebody know I'm working in the kitchen. Like, can you imagine what Martha was doing that day? Let's just be honest. It probably started with a little, see what's going on in here, Mary? One of us is preparing the meal. And then you know it was followed by some massive huffs and blows. Like, right? You can just see this picture unfolding in the New Testament. Like reading between the lines with the pots and pans syndrome. The clanging and the banging and the pots and the pans to let Mary know something is going on. I am frustrated because you're sitting while I am working. The gradual noises, the huffs, the blows, the clanging dishes. She's scrambling. And she's getting frustrated. And not only that, but she's trying to fix the situation. Isn't most of our scrambling trying to do that at times? Instead of allowing Jesus and God to be who they are, instead of allowing them to be the controller, we, particularly those of us who are scramblers, we try to fix things. We try to go in behind. We try to make it right. We try to fix it. We try to change. We try to alter. We try to change that husband. We try to change that spouse. We try to alter the kid's behavior. We try to fix things. And we do exactly what Martha did. As she runs to Jesus and says, Jesus, do you not see what's going on here? Do you not see that I am in the kitchen working and scrambling and clanging pots and pans while she is sitting still? She tries to get Jesus on her side. There was a phrase that my parents would often use with me growing up that we called a come to Jesus moment. You ever had those? Usually involved a leather belt of some sort in my parents' case. We're getting ready to have a come to Jesus moment, Devin. This is Martha's come to Jesus moment as she goes to Jesus and says, Jesus, make Mary do something. And the reality is Mary had already come to Jesus as she sits at his feet. 41. Love Jesus' response. Notice Mary never says a word in this passage. But the Lord answered her, Martha, Martha. And the fact that he repeats her name here is a sign of gentleness. In the original language, it's a gentle response. Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things. You are anxious and troubled about many things. It's a gentle rebuke. Notice what Jesus does not do. He does not rebuke her for serving. What's his rebuke? Martha, you have become anxious and troubled. Right actions, wrong motives. Martha lost sight of what was most important in that moment. And Jesus doesn't correct her actions, he corrects her attitude, because this is a perspective issue. Serving is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. Jesus said He came not to be served, but to serve. Jesus is not condemning serving, He's correcting her motive. Serving is not a bad thing. Serving is a good thing. When we were on this last vacation in the cruise ship, we were reminded, if you've ever been on, some of you that have been on cruises, you know that most of the people that work on the boat are from international countries, all over the world, literally, probably 90+%. And when you have conversations with people, like what they do while they're there, it's like this whole kind of world that happens on the ship behind the scenes. And the people that we interacted with and talked to, we realized that they were working 16 and 18 hours a day, literally, with a smile on their face and a helping hand constantly. And it gave me a different perspective of, here are people that serve with the right attitude and they never slow down, 16, 18 hours a day. Serving is not a bad thing. It gave me a deep respect for the people that were there to kind of help us have an enjoyable time. Serving is a good thing. But here's the key. Gospel-centered serving flows from a heart that is resting in who Jesus is. Gospel-centered serving. When we're serving for the glory of God, gospel-centered serving flows out of a heart that is resting in who Jesus is and who we are in Jesus. And as we draw closer to Jesus, serving becomes a natural result, a natural byproduct of our devoted heart. We tend to serve out of guilt. We tend to serve and judge those who are not doing what we are doing. Look what I do and look what they are not doing. And in our own way, we clang our spiritual pots and pans, frustrated that we're serving and that we're doing things and that our activity looks different than that person's activity. And it makes us feel more righteous, doesn't it? It's that comparison idol. Look what I'm doing. Look how good I am. Look how much better I am than that person who's not doing what they should be doing. 42. Listen to Jesus' final words in this story. Jesus says, Mary, one thing is necessary. One thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which will not be taken away from her. Martha, there's one necessary thing, and Mary has chosen the right. She's made the right decision. And what she's doing will not be taken away from her. What Jesus is saying is, Martha, you are missing the point. You're missing the point because you are distracted by what is urgent. And you are worried and anxious about what you are doing and what Mary is not doing. And you have failed to recognize what is most important in this moment. And like I have said to you before, we struggle with wooden idols and stone idols that we tend to bend the knee to. The idols that we struggle with are good and urgent things that are not the most important things. We tend to bend the knee to what is most urgent. It tends to get our focus and our attention, and we are distracted by the urgent and the good, and we equate busyness with rightness and spirituality. And at times we are working for Jesus, but failing to know Jesus. We are working for Him and failing to know Him. And gospel-centered ministry is fueled by falling in love with Jesus. Not with making a lot of noise and clanging the pots and pans and being worried and anxious and frustrated with who's doing what, not doing what. Gospel-centered ministry is an overflow. It is fueled by falling in love with Jesus. And if we seek our significance in anything outside of Jesus, even in a good thing like serving, if we seek our significance in anything outside of Jesus, it leads us down this unhealthy and sinful path, because He and He alone is to be our highest priority, even in the good matters and the urgent matters. It is He that we seek, first and foremost. And we tend to scramble around trying to please Jesus or fix things or come in behind or pull Him on our side. We tend to focus on what we are doing and pointing out what everyone else is not doing. And Jesus says, "Come sit at my feet. Abide in me. Rest in me. That is where your fruit will come from. That is where your service will come from. Abiding results in serving." Now, do not misunderstand me today. I am not excusing complacency or laziness. Because I can already know how our minds work, right? Like, I'm just going to sit at the feet of Jesus, and I don't have to serve and give and contribute time and energy. Like, I'm sitting at the feet of Jesus. Like, don't ask me to sign up for anything. I'm sitting at the feet of Jesus, right? Like, that's our tendency. But what we're not talking about here is complacency or laziness. Jesus is not condemning service. He is confronting attitude. If you are serving, listen to me closely. If you are serving because you believe it makes you more acceptable to Jesus or to be seen by others, you're missing the point. And the flip side is, if you are not serving because you're too busy with life or self-focused, you are missing the point. Following Jesus will always lead you to sacrificial serving. That's who Jesus is. He doesn't call us to put down the pots and pans. He calls us to embrace them and pick them up for the right reason. Because we love Jesus and we serve as a result of loving Him. As we think about this continued series, we want to be a church who continues what Jesus started by sitting at the feet of Jesus, loving God, and serving those that God has placed in our path, loving others. That's what it means to continue. I will sit at the feet of Jesus and learn and fall in love with who He is. And as a result of that, I will serve those that God has placed in my path. I will love others. As you have heard me say repeatedly throughout this series, we are in this city for a reason. We are in this city and we are to be for this city. We are called to love this city and to serve this city because that's what Jesus did. And we continue what He started. I want to end with John 13. This is the end of Jesus' ministry. He calls His disciples together for Passover. And this is what unfolds. If you know the story, Jesus sent a couple of disciples ahead and said, "Go secure us a room in Jerusalem." He rides in on this donkey and the crowds, worship Him. And He makes His way into this upper room with the disciples where He's going to institute the Lord's Supper, where He's going to give them His final words to them before leaving earth. And before all of that happens, before He says a single word to them, look what happens. John 13:1. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that His hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved His own who were in the world, He loved them to the end. During supper, that lets us know that Jesus was a bit of a southerner, right? He had supper, not just dinner. During supper, when the devil had already put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray Him, look at this framework here, 13:3. Jesus, what? Knowing that the Father had given all things into His hands, and that He had come from God and was going back to God. Who are we talking about? We're talking about the Son of God. That God had given Him all authority. That God had put Him on a divine task. His identity was found in who He was. The Son of God, the Son of the Heavenly Father. Jesus had no identity issues. This is where His identity was, in who He was. So think about it. This is the Son of God. He's been given all authority over heaven and earth. He's about to die for the sins of humanity and be raised back to life by God the Father. How does He respond to that? Verse 4. He rose from supper, and He laid aside His outer garments, and taking a towel, He tied it around His waist, and He poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. If you know anything about that culture, you know that the lowest servants of that day were the ones who washed the feet of the people. That they all wore sandals and went barefoot in those sandy, dirty streets of Jerusalem in that very arid culture where there would have been a lot of dirt and a lot of dust. And they had one servant in the house that whenever someone entered their house would get on their hands and knees and with a basin of water wash the dirty feet of the people that entered. And Jesus, having the full authority of God, about to die for the sins of humanity, knowing who He is, what does He do in that moment? He gets on His hands and feet and He takes the lowest servant position to serve His followers. Jump down to 12. When He had washed their feet and put on His outer garment and resumed His place, He said to them, "Do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher, rabbi, and Lord." That's a big title. Lord, like sovereign God of the universe. You call me this teacher, this rabbi. You call me Lord, and you are right, I am. Jesus said, don't be deceived. I am those things. I am the Messiah. I am the Lord of the universe. And what's His response to that? If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you also should do just as I have done to you. You get that? You're like, this is continue, right? Keep doing what Jesus did. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. This teacher and Lord, He leads by serving. And then He commands us to continue what we started. Why do we serve, Devin? We serve because Jesus made the ultimate sacrifice for us. We serve because He served. Our service flows out of what has been done for us. And the gospel continually raises our awareness of our desperate need for Jesus, that we need to sit at His feet to fall in love with who He is. And the gospel constantly pushes us back to sit at the feet of Jesus. And at the same time, the gospel urgently calls us to represent Jesus to those around us by serving. It pushes us to sit at His feet. And it propels us to serve those that God has placed in our path. That's why we continue what He began to do and teach. As a church, we will pick up the towel and we will serve our city. You know why? Because that is what Jesus' followers who have been sitting at the feet of Jesus do. They serve. Disciples rest in who Jesus is. They love God. And disciples serve people. They love others. That's our call. And yet, amidst all this, we don't measure our significance based on the level of our service, do we? We don't find our identity in the kitchen, in what we are doing. We find our identity in who we are in Jesus. Continue what Jesus began by leaning in to who He is, sitting at His feet, getting His word in us, learning who He is, falling in love with who He is, and then by loving those around us. Fight for your merry moments. Fight for them. Fight for the moments to sit at the feet of Jesus. Because it is by leaning into Jesus that your heart will be fine-tuned into learning how to serve on behalf of Jesus. Jesus said, one thing is necessary. What was the one thing? What was it? the one thing was leaning into who Jesus is, resting in who He is, sitting at His feet. And Jesus says to us today, one thing is necessary. One thing. Lean in to who I am. Rest in who I am. And then, let's go to work. Let's go serve. Let's bow our heads for prayer. Jesus, it's so easy to find our identity in what we are doing and not in who we are in You. I pray that You would help us today to lean into who You are, to rest into who You are, to push into You. May we find our identity in who we are in You. And God, may our service be an overflow. May our service be a result. May our service be a natural fruit, a byproduct of knowing who we are in Jesus. God, I thank You so much for every person that serves in this church to make it happen week in and week out, week in and week out. But may we never lose sight. May we never lose sight that our significance is not found in how much we do, but our significance is found in who You are and what You have done for us. And as we rest in that, as we sit at Your feet, as we push for those merry moments, would You enable and equip us to serve effectively? May we be in our city. May we be for our city. May we love God, and may we love others. In Jesus' name we do pray. Amen.